This is The Last of Us Part 2, second video. The game was released in 2020 by Naughty Dog, and it's a sequel to the original game. In this video, we will look into how some assets were created. We will learn amazing tricks they have used. We will see how concept artists helped the 3D team. And we will see how they blended materials to integrate assets in the environments. So we are looking into the work of Matthew Trevelyan-Johns once more, and we are looking into this part right here. So let's look at the screenshot from the game. So overview of the area, and we're going to look at one specific asset. So let's look at this guard tower, which was made in a modular fashion so that other areas could benefit from it. The artist borrowed design elements from military vehicles for the armored panels, as you can see here, to help ground them with my other Fedra vehicle design. So that's very interesting. You can see the parts here and then assembled and then textured. And here you can see in context in the environment. Next, we are looking at the hospital entry level. And this is a flooded area or sewer kind of type. And this is going to be very interesting regarding the shaders. So here's another look at the location, and here we have the shaders. So this material has a lot of layers. You have a world space elevation driven wetness effect first, a border blend waterline, painted cinder blocks, bare cinder blocks, peeling paint effect, which is going on right here, cement seal, that you can see here, insulation, and wetness streaks and staining. So this material setup was used extensively on all walls in this relatively small basement area. This example uses an A to B shader blend, whereby two shaders, A and B, blend into each other seamlessly. The A shader consists of the cinder block material with waterline, and the B shader represents the insulation material with wetness streaks. Both materials use a cement layer that acts as a border between them. So that's really interesting to understand how it was layered on. So two different shaders with all those layers. Right here we have the base color or albedo only. So an example of the base color view mode taken in engine. I like to try and keep my color palettes controlled, and in this case using a water staining layer on everything that touched the waterline. You can see the waterline. So in this video we see the two shaders being blended together, and you can see at the start here, you can see the seam between, and you can see, let's stop it at the end, how everything looks well integrated, well blended. Everything makes sense. So that's the use of all those layers. Okay, so still from Matthew Trevelyan-Johns, let's hear it from him. So he had two roles on The Last of Us Part 2. One as the vehicle specialist, asset creation, art, technical pipeline, management of library, and the other as a level artist, textures, shaders, assets. So here we're going to look into the vehicles. So there are 500 vehicles in the Naughty Dog vehicle library, all created for The Last of Us Part 2. Given the scale of the project and the amount of vehicles that were depicted in concepts, I knew that accepting the responsibility of being the vehicle specialist on top of the other level art responsibilities would be a huge challenge. Without a dedicated team to work on vehicles for the duration of the project, I focused on developing a pipeline that could not only produce the highest quality assets, but that could also be done within an efficient time frame. While I modeled a large amount of vehicles, often saving the hero vehicles or the entire military series for myself, I am also incredibly thankful to our outsourced vendors for their help with many vehicle modeling, UVing tasks. There are many vehicles that our vendors modeled almost entirely before I would then receive them, add additional detail, and carry out my texturing, shading, technical setup pipeline. So I think it's important to mention with that many vehicles, I think it's clear that it's impossible for not only one person, but even part of the team at Naughty Dog to accomplish that, right? That's on top of the buildings, of the characters, of the weapons, of the props. So definitely outsourced vendors were a necessity. So this is a interesting overview of the vehicles. And here is one which stands out from the rest, right? So ice cream truck, which is fun. So an earlier vehicle the artist made, enjoy adding a few of these novelty vehicles at the start of production. It wasn't used often, maybe just once, but it was good fun creating the ice cream flavor menu and novelty cone itself. That's cool. So of course that probably gives a break from doing the similar looking in the same kind of type vehicle. So that was cool. And here we have a lot of information. So shared wheel set. So all regular vehicles used a shared set of wheels. High and low poly modeling was around a 50-50 split between himself and the outsourced vendors. And I was able to UV map the entire set onto just one texture sheet. Created 4 variations of flattened tire that were mapped to the tiling tire section of the texture. Each hubcap then had 4 different tire types to partner with. Texture using Substance Painter, for this using my own custom material sets. So this is a very smart approach for the tires. So you have a few variations and you can reuse, mix and match, and be done with a large library of assets. So that was really, really smart. So breakdown. Here's a breakdown of how I built a shared set of wheels that were used by the majority of the vehicles. Baking a tire trim was a really great way to create tires in this case, rather than baking from a more traditional high poly tire asset. Of course, they couldn't afford to bake multiple different type of tires. So a mindset of reusing high quality textures over and over, being able to mix and match so that it doesn't all look the same. That was a brilliant idea. Here we can take a look. This one, the heavy trucks were also a lot of fun. On this particular vehicle, outsourcing handled around 75% of the modeling work with the artist's feedback before he took over and applied texture and shader pipeline, applying modeling and the final technical setup. So yeah, there's just no way around it. Not everything can be modeled by the team. The shaders, the texturing, the detailing, that if you want to preserve the art direction, that is handled in-house by the artist. That makes a lot of sense. Then you have below some examples of vehicles excellently placed by environment artists in their levels. It took a lot of effort to have the vehicle models and materials all sit well together and feel grounded in whatever environments they were placed in. Of course, because you need to believe that they were there, rusting and getting weathering together at the same spot. So that's quite the achievement. It took me a lot of iteration to find a balance in the shaders, where details would hold up to scrutiny whilst still reading well at distance. Was particularly happy with the peeling paint effect. That's honestly the first thing I noticed in this one. Like, this is so nice, and I believe it reads well even from a certain distance. Of course, not very, very far, but you can see the, the transition between the paint and the rusted metal layer underneath. You can see very well how it's done with the peeling paint, and it looks so good. Here also, it looks very good. Here we have a look at the wireframe of this bulldozer. So the triangle count for this vehicle was 51K. So if you're wondering, if you're a student passionate about modeling, and you're wondering constantly, am I doing too little, too much? What's the target? Well, there will not be a definite answer for any asset. It's always depending on context and budget. But you can look at those assets made for those games that were very successful, and that could give you an idea, right? If you're aiming for that level of quality, well, you need to have enough geometry, enough polygons, enough quads, so that you can vertex paint, so that you can do what you need afterwards, right? So the Big Dog was a really fun vehicle to make. I built this from the ground up, and it served as the test bed for the Hero Vehicle pipeline. Well, that's a good choice, right? Both for modeling and for texturing. So probably this is something that they used for the outsourced vendors to basically show them the poly count, the kind of techniques that were used, and I guess the texturing was made in-house. So now we are moving on to the wet vehicle. So that was a specific set of vehicles that used many tricks. In this short video, we can appreciate a great trick they used. So all wet vehicles had the ability to enable an animated rain effect. The artists worked with Stephen Tang and Kei Xu to ensure that artists could enable this feature on the click of a button in Maya with no new shaders or alternative models necessary. So that's another debug view that shows the rain droplets, top facing, Fresnel blending at the edge, and the streaks applied to steep angles, and how they blend together and update based on rotation position. So that's just brilliant. Finally, as vehicles got further away, the shader layers would fade out and reduce, or certain effects would turn off. The transitions were gradual in game, but this is an important step to make sure they weren't rendering too many expensive pixels. So those are the kind of tools that are developed at Naughty Dog. So let's take a closer look at the snow-covered vehicles. So we have a little gym here, a snow vehicle test level that the artist created. There are a few missing here, but this is the majority of the snow-covered vehicles that's featured in Last of Us Part 2. So we have a good look here, and we have a closer look here. So this is a nice example of a final look created for the snow vehicles. Vehicle model was shared between all looks, but the shader treatment and snow kit made these suitable for all snowy level. So there is a lot going on, and we will explore every single layer that goes into the shader real soon. This image shows the relatively seamless transition of a snow kit and the vehicle surface shader. If you look closely, you can see that the snow on the metal surface also has subtle depth to it. So that's because the layer of snow here is modeled, but then the shader on the car itself helps the transition and the blending. So this is very high level quality of work. Here we have another interesting angle. From the top, you can see the distribution and the transition. We have more examples. We're going to go a bit quickly through the examples. So parallax occlusion map decals were used in the same way it did on some of the ships in Star Citizen to represent small rivets. Those here, vents and panel lines. The military vehicles use this technique extensively. So yeah, parallax occlusion are used frequently to create the illusion of depth at a cheaper cost. So this is very, very nice, and I really, really like the transition. And also here, a very good look, great close-up. Of this dark, foreboding area of the game, the environment artist did a great job placing the vehicles and building the snow drifts up and around them. Environment artists were Julian Elwood and Jeremy Huxley, plus others in supporting roles. So yeah, a very important element with snow and large props is how to make them, how to integrate them in the environment. It's not just the work of the shader, it's also the level art, the environment art around it. Here we have a very good look. This is very, very realistic stuff. Very believable. And here we have a bonus wireframe view of the truck itself, but you can see the layer of snow here. So you can see part of it is modeled. And then the shader, so let's put them back to back next to each other. So let's investigate this one here, right? So you see the actual snow asset stops not straight, but really clearly. And then the shader is working its magic so that you don't see a straight line. Here you see more of a straight line on the hood, but it is logical, right? Because the snow doesn't really accumulate or stays here, especially that this is hot, right? While the engine is running. So this is perfectly normal that it's more clear cut here. On the side, it's less clear cut. It is kinda, but less than here, right? And over here, it makes sense that it spreads a little bit on the front surface. And oh, let's look at this part also. You can see this is a layer of snow modeled here. And you can see the density also is higher than the hard surface below. Probably helped to get a more organic-ish shape. So that's very interesting. And let's see if there's a little... yes, there is. See, so now on the side also, we don't see it very well here, but here you have also some snow. So this is really like the highest quality that you can reach for snow-covered vehicles. Let's take a look at these guys. The RV that you explore at one point has a slightly different approach to the surface. Using a slope blend driven by the normal detail within the texture, he was able to simulate fine snow gathering along the paneling of the metal exterior. Yeah, because this, in the real world, this is sticking to surfaces differently, right? So it needed a different surface. That is a great effect that you can see here. Let's see if we can zoom. It does stick to vertical surfaces of this type. Great stuff. Here we have another example. We saw Ellie clamber up on the side of this vamp in one of our demos. This shot proved to be the real motivator in getting the wetness streaks and melted snow effect to look good up close. Very, very nice effect. You can also see on the tree right here. And that could be a topic of a whole different breakdown, how to do that on vegetation and foliage. Let's stick to vehicle for this one. Now, moving on to the main breakdown. So this one has a lot of information. So I will make this pure ref board available as soon as this video is released. So you will be able to take a good look, read absolutely everything. We're just going to do an overview. So on the left part, you'll have the BRDF layer appearance, so the bidirectional reflectance distribution function. And on the right, you have more options, different options that are explained. So snow layer 1. The snow itself was our library snow. It uses a detail map for small crystals, and I added an ice edge effects to simulate a more icy feeling where the snow meets the metal. So that's a very good starting point. Then you have a blend mask, snow blend mask on top of slope-based shader blend. It alters based on the angle of the surface it is applied to. Remember that they are setting this up for many different vehicles, and they will be placed in different angles, different environments. So it's more than just working on one asset with snow. It's a whole pipeline of snow covering the vehicles. Remember that when we explore the shader, it has to be versatile. So car paint, layer number 2, is a simple shader that changes color based on world space positioning. Choosing from a curated color palette, it blends against the snow rather than underneath it for optimization. Car paint blend mask. This mask blends against the snow layer, pictured above. These inverted blends are common as it helps us reduce the amount of overlapping shaders on assets. Building multi-layered shaders can be tricky, but optimizing them is a whole new challenge. So you can see different masks working against each other. Snow dust. So let's compare this one and this one. So we use the subtle snow dust layer as a transitional layer to soften the binary nature of the snow to metal blend. It is a sample off-white color and slight roughness change. It also has 30% opacity to help it feel softer. That's really a transition layer to go from more of a hard contrast to a much softer. Snow dust blend mask. This mask uses a generic grunge texture created that is used somewhat universally on vehicles, as well as the grunge texture to drive the blend. I also invert this against the main snow texture and use the slope functionally once more. So yeah, masks are just a must to blend different layers. Metal imperfection. Let me always compare with the previous one. It's not totally apparent here, but this layer is a subtle metal normal and gloss combination that will apply fine scratches and metal warping to the metallic parts of the car. Probably easier to see in engine in real time and moving around because it's more on the roughness. Metal imperfections blend mask. This mask blends against snow so that the snow does not inherit any of the metallic scratches, normal map, so that my texture samples remain optimal. Of course, you don't want that effect to be on the snow at all. And here's a very important one. Melting snow wetness. I like the idea that the snow would melt a little in sunny snow levels, causing water streaks and adding interesting specularity. The drips always flow vertically, no matter what angle the car is at too. Here you can see the mask. Created this water drip texture quickly using a hack and slash method, I like the term, which would make texturing purists weep. However, my draft version ended up working so well it remained and even became the wetness blend mask you see on wet weapons in the game. Very interesting. So yeah, that is a very important effect. Even if, the weather goes like slightly higher in temperature, then at night goes back. So some of it will melt and streaks will appear and then it will freeze over. So it remains like as a dirty leaks, if you will, kind of decal that you that you might be used to. And this is very important. Like, and if we go back to the previous layers, you see that, okay, that's interesting, but that's not complete, right? And you see with each layer how much more realistic it becomes. And here is just like fantastic. The rust is subtle and reduced to fine occlusion and wear and tear, so as not to detract from the main read, which I wanted to be the snow and wetness. The rust also absorbs the wetness and darkness accordingly. So they are abandoned vehicles. They've been there for years probably. So they had to be rusty, but the snow is the main feature, if you will. So that's really, really well done. And here we have the mask. My rust blend masks were universal, and the same one was reused for each shader variation. Our shader editor allows for certain controls on a mask that make them incredibly versatile. Reducing the rust was a matter of quickly tweaking some sliders and additional controls I chose to add. So masks are a must for control. So this video gives us a better look at the roughness, specularity, and how it behaves in real time. And here's a look at the RV in real time. And here we will explore the moss vehicles. So the moss look was intended for those situations where an artist would place vehicles amidst lots of overgrowth and foliage. Used in conjunction with my leaf kit system, it was possible to integrate vehicles well with their surroundings very quickly. So yeah, you gotta have systems, right? So you can't just manually place everything. I mean, you can do that for your portfolio if you're a student and you have time, but this is across a production with hundreds of cars. So the pipeline has to be very solid. Mesh instancing is crucial to our process. This vehicle mesh would be the same instance as a wet version, a snow version, etc. The different looks are achieved via shader remapping on top of an instance. It's a complex system, but incredibly powerful. So we have seen the wet vehicles, we have seen the snow-covered vehicles. So they basically have all of that information in the shader. So that's a big job. It probably required quite a bit of time to set up. But once it was done in production, things were much easier and actually possible, because they would never have time to achieve such a look if they didn't have a super strong system. Here we have creating a shader variation for a vehicle wasn't a quick process. Each vehicle had around 8 shaders, and each shader was multi-layered, up to 8 layers, imagine. So creating a new shader variation set and having it feel right in each environment was challenging. Well, I can see that, but the result is absolutely worth all that effort. And this is where you get a better understanding of pre-production work. There is, for every department, it means something different, but in such a game, the artists, the leads, the principal artists were hard at work establishing the pipeline, and that was worth it. Another example of how the moss shaders would procedurally adapt to the world space positioning and rotation of a vehicle, always covering the top side and being influenced by areas of occlusion. So yeah, that's just a great shader, right? You can rotate the vehicles, and then the moss would distribute logically, and it would also respect the occlusion, or be driven by the occlusion rather. The dirt soil layer that sat underneath the moss was an important small detail to help sell the idea that moss could grow and form on metal that was perhaps already dirty and covered in years of fallen dust and moisture. So yeah, you see it everywhere. That's not a small detail. That's huge. Because if you just add moss on top of metal, it wouldn't look as realistic. So this shows shader layers reacting to rotation of the vehicle as well as the relationship between rust and moss. Rust will only draw on areas clear of moss and never underneath it, thereby reducing texture samples and making the shader cheaper to render. So it's high quality, versatility, and economy all at work in this example. So you can appreciate the genius of this pipeline. Next, we are looking into the work of Sharon Ding, who did the Chinatown Arch. So the Chinatown Arch is found in the chapter Hostile Territory. She was involved in creating the high poly, low poly, bakes, and texture. Special attention was given to UV's arrangement and texture creation. Many hours spent in planning high poly and UV's map arrangements. She's right to be pleased with the outcome because this is a very nice piece and you can understand all the planning of high poly sculpting because it's not a simple asset at all with all those ornamental dragons. Then around the columns, you have a lot of detail also. So we can take a look at it in the environment. It looks gorgeous. And we can take a look at the breakdown, at the details. So you see the dragon around the columns with the scales, with everything. So much work went into it. Then all the ornamental work also across the piece. And of course, those dragon statues sitting on top. So it's no wonder that this piece was delegated to an outsourced vendor because this is time consuming and this is really a lot of work. And there's so much to do that it really makes sense that this was done by an outsourced studio. And we can see here the wireframe. You can see this is pretty high around here, of course, because this is highly detailed. So you can see the maps also, so 2 texture sets. And it was done in kind of a not modular way, but like symmetrically, right? Because it was symmetrical, so just half was made. This is really common. Very nice piece. Very interesting to see how it was made. If you are interested in learning how to apply those techniques that we're covering while analyzing those games, I have created a class in which I show everything step by step. I show all the techniques, all the tricks. There are no time lapse, nothing is done off screen. And I take the time to explain what we do and why we do it. I show the best practices and we are covering a small environment from A to Z. We are showing every single step of how it's done on a professional production. So if you are interested, check it out. There's the link in the description and there's a discount available with the code provided. So the next artist is Anthony Dizon. So here's one of the props he did for The Last of Us, an Art Deco looking facade used as a stage prop. There was supposed to be crude looking scaffolding behind, but I have omitted it. The textures it had were in-house shaders from Naughty Dog. So this asset has around 21K polygons. So this is very, very good for young artists who are always wondering about the poly count. So you see, actually, let's put them side to side. So that's the main part, the high poly, then this ornament here, which is done, of course, more or less half of it. So it can be symmetrically applied on the other side. And then the lamppost here. So we see now the low poly with the textures. We see another angle. And here we have quite a bit of info. You see where the density is higher. And you can see that it's chamfered all throughout the model because they're using weighted normals so that everything appears smoother. It's not super hard edges, right? You can tell with the light here, it's a little bit obvious. So every edge has a chamfer applied to it and then weighted normals. It's a great piece. Next, we have a very interesting, it's a kit for the arcade machine. So let's look at the description. So he was tasked with making an arcade parts kit bash kit that could be used by other arcade assets. Almost all of the baking texturing work he did for the project was done with Substance Designer, as it allows for grime texture settings to be changed and swapped from one asset to the other. The entire kit amounts to around 3,400 triangles. So let's take a look at some parts of the machine, and then we can see the wireframe. So you can see that this is quite low poly. It's quite it's small assets, so there really no need for that many polys. But with the texturing, it looks very, very good. And here we can see in context, and we can see that many parts were reused across different machines. Next up, we have the keyboard set. So 2 electric keyboards with a synthesizer, all compressed in a single texture sheet and textured in Substance Painter. The amount of grime had to be enough as these items were in an abandoned area of the game. The larger electric keyboard had 1,700 triangles. The smaller one has around 1,600 and the synthesizer has 800. So let's take a closer look. This is the high poly, and you can see the strategy was, of course, to not bake multiple keys, but just a set of keys, and then it would be reused, remapped on the low poly. So those are the high polys. This is the low polys with the wireframe, and you can see the keys are just reused. So that's a very smart approach. Of course, if you have lots of similar parts, you're not going to create a high poly and rebake them. You're just going to use a section, and you see where the geo is used. So this is a separate piece. All the knobs are separate pieces. This one, the little controller itself is a separate piece, but the part where it stands in is part of the main asset, of the main element. So here you have more of the same with some keys, some buttons all baked, and others which needed to stand out a bit more or modeled. And you see also that everything is chamfered. So they're going to use with that low, it's really low poly for, I wouldn't say complicated prop, but for some detailed props. So they're going to use the mid poly workflow. They're going to use weighted normals. And here you can see the final version, which looks really cool. The grime added makes sense. And you see nothing is super hard edge because of the weighted normals. So let's take a look at the small synthesizer. Same approach. The knobs are modeled. Those kind of touchpad are baked. The small screws are also baked. because they're smaller. Then we have a closer look with this keyboard, and another look, another screenshot with the wireframe. So then we can see some various props from the artist, and we can see that all the baking texturing work was done with Substance Designer for ease of resizing and transfer of details. So let's take a look. Some simple props in some cases, and always great to see the wireframes so you can see. And that can help artists with less experience understand how to do these, where to put more geo. And of course, this is just one example, right, from one studio. Doesn't mean that it has to be modeled this way in every circumstance, but it's still very good to have a great example, set of examples. Next up, we have the work of Julie Almoneda and the workbench items. So those are small props, but they need, well, the team needed a lot of those, right? And here is a very interesting look, and you can see some are as basic and simple as can be. You can see how the cylinders were capped off, and you can see how everything was modeled, and then you can see in context. So very nice assets, very nice. Look, the texture is doing the heavy lifting, and the modeling is really clean, really simple, really budget friendly, I would say. But look at the texturing is really doing an amazing job. Next up, we have the Evil Eye set. So we have a couple of images to go through. So you have this version, you have this one, and here we have the wireframe. So you see that it's not extremely low poly. They give always like a decent budget, even to smaller props. You can see here how it was modeled exactly. Always interesting, and you can see in-game. You can see this is actually another model, different model here. You can see the distribution, the density of vertices, and you can see those guys in context. Now we're moving on to another 3D artist, Bernadette Lirio, who worked on the concrete barrier. So modular concrete barrier that was used for set dressing levels on The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. So let's take a closer look. In-game, those look very, very good. And we can see here, so you have different versions, different level of destruction. Here you can see a cleaner version, albeit not clean, but not destroyed, just chipped on the sides here and there, and obviously very dirty, weathered, and some wear and tear here and there. And here we can see the wireframe. So this would be for a cleaner version, such as this one, right? This would be this one here in this angle. And this would be the one that is much more destroyed. And you can see different layers, different levels, and different level of density of vertices because of the need. So that is very interesting for artists who wants to learn how to do these things. You can study those wireframes, right? The principles behind that. Like you see, wherever it's destroyed and it needs the other texture, we have a little bit more density here for probably vertex painting. So next up, we have the medical boxes. which appear throughout the game, here and there. And you can see the kit here. And we can see all the details on the cardboard, like wetness and different types of wear and tear. And here we can see the wireframe. Very clean, very simple. Very optimized, of course, because it's a small asset, but it's an important one nonetheless. And here we have more assets to look into. First, the projector screen. And here's a look at it in-game. And here are some variations with different angles, different state, and of course when it's pulled out completely. And here is the geo behind it. So we can see even in the most simple state, there is more geo than just a couple of edge loops, right? Because those folds are not baked, they are created with the help of geo. And also the other versions with way more folds, well then, of course, they have way more geo. And the edge loops are different. So it's a very different version. And this is very, very good to better understand how these things are done. Next up, we have the printer, or the set of printers, electronics, actually. So in many areas, we can find these machines laying around. And as good as it looks, as great as it looks, it really, really looks very, very good, all of those. But you see how the modeling is very simple, very straightforward, but the textures are really selling it. They are really doing the heavy lifting. It's all on the textures, right? The models are good, of course, but the textures are absolutely bringing it to another level. And here we have another look at the complete set, all the different assets from this kit. And here we have the wheel balancer. And this is a really cool prop. Really, really cool. And here's the most interesting part, the wireframe. So again, you see that nothing is super hard edge. There are chamfers everywhere, simple chamfers, and it's making it look really real. Actually, this part here is the only one I can tell that is super hard edge. And that's because the actual model requires it, right? A little bit more than the rest. So even if it's all hard surface, the hard edges are really, really rare. When you want to sell realism, that's one of the things that kills it, basically. But also you can see the level of wear and tear, because this is on the floor level and this is where you can put your feet. So the textures are really helping, not making this look super hard edge, while it actually is. So that's very interesting. See, like you can mitigate that effect. Like if you were to use clean textures, it would really look out of place somehow. But with that level of wear and tear, grime, and this is rust mostly, it doesn't look like a super straight line that much. Next, we're going to look into the work of Tom Nemeth, who worked on Capitol Hill section. So just as a reminder, this is the level with houses that you can enter to gather loot and stuff. And now we can see a look with the lighting pass right here and the in-game complete look. Same for this one. We can see the cars that we checked earlier. And here we have a look at a custom debug they have in their engine, which is the density of vertices and polygons. So you can see where you have more quads and triangles. Well, this is where you have more geometry. So it's not the wireframe, but it gives a good indication on how dense the edges and vertices are on the meshes. Next, we have the escape. So we have a few more screenshots to go through, again with the light pass and the in-game. Always interesting. I really like to see the wireframes, but the lighting pass alone also is great. Same here. Same thing here. Here you have a screenshot of the in-game environment. Another one, beautiful environment. And here you have this debug again. So you can see where we have more density and where you have less. I mean, here is water basically, so that's probably taken care by a complex shader. But here, for instance, you have more. Can we see the pipes from this angle? Or here? We can't really see the pipes, but they're very visible. And they needed to blend. Well, we see here, right? So they are really visible because part of the roof is open, and thus you see metal, rust, and probably moss all blended together. So there was a need for vertex painting. That's why you have more density on those assets. Now we are going to look into the work of James Shu, concept artist, illustrator. So the first project he's sharing is the theater props concept art. He's saying happy to see most of the designs are modeled out beautifully. So we can see the idea here, and it's really the style that we're going for. And we can see the concept art. So we see different types, different shapes, right? All in the same style. And we see a little bit more here. And then we can see right here. So you have the ideas present that were basically synthesized from the concept. So that's always interesting to see. And he's mentioning something crucial. It's the goal, the intention of the concept artists. Actually, the role of concept art is to help the modelers, is to help the 3D team, is to help the art directors, all the decision makers, but essentially on a technical level, it's really to help the modelers do their work more easily. It's to help them. It's really an assistance to modeling. And we're going to see that even more clearly in the next project, Seraphites Props Early Concept. So this one is absolutely amazing. So you will see really what concept art in a video game studio is really for. You see some examples, some callouts, like what is that? This is an office table, steel cabinet door. So you see the elements, so the 3D artists know exactly what materials will be used and how, like the weight, you know, the reality, the physics behind the object. And also there's the appearance, so the textures and materials, and the actual object itself that they have to model. And this is absolutely fantastic, right? Because you see concept art in an angle like that, but then you see the exact placement of the different elements. Then you see the underneath. So this is really why they pay concept artists. It's not just to do amazing shot, right? That, of course, ArtStation is full of those. The complete final shot, which is great, but that's not the daily tasks of the concept artists, right? So you see these, it's additional information that on one image, like this is cutting 10 questions from the 3D team to the art directors or whoever's and had the idea. So this is just fantastic. And here we have a bit more. And I mean, the concepts are actually very, very cool and very good looking. But you have here the side view to stop ramp from sliding. So it's not just visual. You have the functional information also that helps understand, okay, this is how it works. Because good 3D, this is all CGI. At the end of the day, the whole game, I know a lot of detractors that don't like video games, like, this is not real. This is not, it's not grounded in anything. Well, the good games are. And it's still CGI, yes, but it's systems that make sense. And when it's grounded in reality, such as this, in basic physics principles, right, it makes it more believable. And if you scale that in everything in the project, well, you get something that makes a whole lot of sense and that people can be, it's immersive, right? It's those little details. Like there's the high level stuff, the concepts, the lore, the narrative, of course, but it's in the small details that you actually really go further. And here we have with the cable railing, so different versions. This is wonderful. And this is what, I mean, I don't work at Naughty Dog, but in the past I've been working with concept art, and this is good concept art. When you get that as a 3D artist, you're like, good. Your job is much easier. Doesn't give you like all the answers. You still gotta bring your skills, right? You still gotta deliver, but it cuts so much confusion and you are not wasting any time. You can just execute as best as you can. Here we have even more great examples. So I like that. You have those poles, right, which have been repurposed as ladders, and you see the exact simplified shape that they should be showing, and then you see the version with the assets, with the props. Here you have callouts as to what is used in there. So that's just great. Office partition, office room divider. So those are stuff that anybody who worked in an office have seen or is seeing every day. And then as a 3D artist, you're like, okay, this is what. So then you can gather references and get it just right. So that's fantastic. And here we have another view and more technical explanation. So I love it. Connection between two steel bars. And then you see how they are connected exactly. They're wrapped up with two smaller pieces on the side. Then you have even the functionality explained and shown with those arrows. Current way of stepping out the ladder here. Alternative ladder structure, different way of stepping out the ladder. So that's for functionality of the character, because it's basically the ladder is in the middle, so you can go from both sides. So that gives so much information. That is fantastic. I love it. So here we have the Santa Barbara environment concept art. So he was still a novice working on environment art while working on this piece. I'm very thankful for my senior and teammate Lum Siu Hong that we have seen already for guiding me through this and several other pieces of environment art that have contributed. So that's really cool. So let's look at the final version first. which is an amazing piece of concept art. Another version. So this is an iterative process. It's true for most roles, and concept art sure is no stranger to iterations. So you see, first part, like you have to basically show something quickly, so it's not detailed at all, right? It's kind of almost like a block out. If you are a level designer, you could relate. For an environment artist, that's a very rough sketch. It's just giving you the mood, the layout, how, like you still got a lot of information from this one. Then it's much more detailed already, and you can see how the spaces are used. You can see some props that can be used, and you see what's available, what's blocked, and also it tells a story, right? This is being put there for cover, so it already has storytelling elements to it. And here basically this is great to have those side by side. So you see, so basically that has been approved, and then the artist went on and added onto it, added some details, added some elements. So going back to our final versions, so we have this one here, which is actually the same as the last iteration. And here we have another angle, another view of the environment. So I think this is a good view into the process of some tasks of concept art. Let's look at the work of Jad Saber and the black and white concepts. So the bike shops and other concepts for The Last of Us Part 2. These quicker concepts were mostly done to figure out destruction properly or to give ideas on set design, what kind of props would be there, etc. So those are very nice. Quickly done because no color, but still very, very good attention to detail. And very important for the team. So before, you get to the engine and people start modeling, having a good concept artist do a pass like that, that is just amazing. Like how much information you get and how things are already pretty much figured out. That is just great. We have another one here, still from the bike shop. You can see from the other floor how it looks like. Then another one here, another angle. That is very interesting for 3D artists. And then the last one here with also callouts. So which asset, which prop, what to use, right? Fire extinguisher, cargo crate. So probably at some point, there are many of those assets that are already available in the library. So the environment artist, maybe there's going to be a few things specific that are very important, so they request it, but they can already, like they start by they get the block out, they start by the largest pieces. They probably have some materials to lay down on the ground. So very quickly, it starts to give a very good idea of how it's going to look like. And then with such detailed information, they can drag and drop some assets that are already available and request those who will be needed. So that is really, really good to see. So let's take a look at Rado Markovic's work. This one is the stadium design idea. This is full of information. So you see great concept art, first of all, but that's not all. What you see is a lot of callouts onto the purpose of this environment, the props to use, all sorts of great information. So this is really fantastic to be able to see that. And this is what is used in production. As an everyday concept artist, those are the kind of things you have to provide. So there are different phases, of course, different stages of production. And before we start to go ahead, build stuff, put them together in the engine, work on the lighting, and so on and so forth, this is a great starting point. So we see many angles of the environment, and we see additional information for everything. And this makes the life of the environment team so much easier. Now, here's the work of Danar Waria, concept artist. So this is a concept breakdown for The Last of Us Part 2. So let's look into the process, and this should be very interesting. So here's the first main image, the main concept. And let's dive in. So the briefing. Usually start with big brief, which our art director Shadi Safadi makes a video to break down what narrative designers wants. Thenceforth, hands out the images to different artists. He was entrusted with the medical tent. So you can see basic blockout with some props already in their library, just to, make it seem like, just explain a little bit more about the space. They provided us with a rough 3D mockup and an early in-game screenshot of the space, and a little description which stated medical tent interior with wounded and operating tables. This wasn't always the case. It depends on the brief and which type of image we were appointed to. So that's very interesting. Like we're learning about the process at Naughty Dog. Then research reference. Before I start with my 3D, I do the most essential part of image making for me, and that is my research. To make your image as authentic as possible, it's important to know your subject matter. And this is the starting point of every artist's work. As an environment artist, as a prop artist, I'm sure character artists also, basically absolutely everything starts with a lot of research. And this is where and when you really dig deep into the subject matter, into the finer details. And this is like an absolute must. It's one of the most important parts. It's really like the planning of everything. And it's the foundation of how it's going to look like. It depends on the quality of your references. So a good exercise is to try to write all the keyword you can find on your subject matter. That's actually a very good trick. And try to find as much reference as you can so that you have a lot of options to play with in later stages. When people say Naughty Dog's games are realistic, it's not because of how it looks, but also because of their extensive research they do for their games. I am 100% agreeing with that. Of course, the realism of the props, of the environments, this is what people perceive as being realistic, but it all relies on great references and believable and references that makes sense also. So this is the base render. The most important part here is that I have a strong base, which gives me a good head start for when I photo bash. It tells me where the light is coming from and gives me a better sense of space. This looks pretty good for at this stage already. I tried to keep it simple so that I had enough space to improvise once I started Photoshop. A good tip I once got from my friend Florent is a good photo always beats a 3D render. Keep in mind, every good thing comes with practice. This took me 3 years to understand and I still struggle with it. Balance is key. Well, yeah, constant learning and constant applying what you learn is the key in this industry. So this is pretty cool initial render. Film reference. Before going into Photoshop and starting to create the final image, I try to find film references, which gives me the overall mood and color grade I want to bring about in my image. That is crucial. That is absolutely crucial. I'm at the other end of concept art. I don't do concept art, but I work with amazing pieces of concept art. And yeah, you can tell that they did the research. They established the mood, the color grading, the light, everything. Fortunately, art director John Sweeney always provided us with amazing references. Really had the luck of working with someone who had a clear vision of what he wanted. It's very, very nice. Pointers. While bringing the images to life in your execution phase, refrain from solely relying on your 3D base. It is very hard to get overboard with detailing as the image can lose its readability. On enough occasions, I had a detailed 3D base and the photo still worked better and I used that. That's a great advice. Like sometimes the actual photo is just working better than whatever 3D base they have, right? Like this is really really good. Actually, it looks like this was reused here and painted over or something. Very interesting. And same here. Great stuff. You cannot see the effort made in 3D as waste of time because it still taught you something for the next image. However, getting attached to what you create in the execution phase can be detrimental. You always need to keep your aim with the concept at hand in check. Very interesting. Pointers. As you can imagine, there's no one size fits all here. It all depends on the artist's take. The visionaries of this project always gave hints on what was going on, but they never used me for my drawing hand only. That's why it becomes so essential to challenge yourself continuously. It is fully in your hands to honor the overall vision. This would always trigger and challenge my creativity to bring on what I had to say to table. It was about going the extra mile. That extra mile included thorough desktop researches for the smallest details about all elements in the frame to be as realistic as possible. And yeah, you can see that there is a lot going on, right? And that is so important. And like, thank you very much to the artist for publishing such a breakdown of the process because it helps us understand really how things work. And if the concept art is that good, it's gonna make the environment, the props, the characters, like the 3D assets, that much better. So this phase is crucial. And it's so interesting to have such great insight into it. And lastly, we have Emilia Schatz, game designer. And this is just a beautiful way to wrap up our videos on the Last of Us games. We see the basically before and after. So you see the blockout, the main working blockout that the game designers, the level designers were testing, experimenting, and submitting, that they submitted to the art department. And you can appreciate how it changed, how it evolved, how it stayed true to its vibe, to its nature, while evolving because of technical limitations, because of gameplay, because of so many different reasons. But it's really fascinating, and you see that it's well, some are a little bit more detailed. You already had some foliage, some grass, some indication, some trees in this case, and that were not kept, were moved. But you see how so many things were clearly established already, and you see how some moved out of the way, were discarded. So it's really this is the iterative process. We don't see the iterations. We see a freeze frame of day number. Well, I don't know what day it was in production, but you know, like day one of the final blockout, if you will. And probably it was not final. Probably it moved for gameplay reasons also. But this is fascinating to look into, and this is how you could be working as an environment artist, as a level artist. You just do a very quick blockout, color coded, maybe not that intense. This is a lot of different colors, which is great, but you don't need to do that. You know, like most environment artists for their portfolio, They just do a basic blockout gray box because you don't need really to color code it. It's not gameplay related. It's just the shape languages, right? The volumes, the distances, and the composition. And this one really stayed true. It's really, really impressive. And it's really, really nice to see. Take a look how this is the working environment for a long time before it gets to the final look, before it goes from this to that. Of course, you can imagine it takes a very long time, but it's extremely satisfying to see getting started and being done with it. So that's one last aerial view of this part of the environment. So that was very fun to take a look at those. So this is the end of the video, but fear not, there will be tons of other videos on different games from different studios, different genre. There are many planned for the near future. In case you missed, there are many other videos on the channel of environment breakdowns, some of them on The Last of Us, many of them on other games. So check out the channel, subscribe, like, hype. It's a new thing. Apparently it can help the channel, so please consider doing it, and see you next time.